Number 10. GPS guides father off broken bridge. 47-year-old father of two, Phil Paxson, was driving home from a family birthday party in Hickory, North Carolina on a fall night in 2022 when his GPS guided him down a concrete road that suddenly dropped off into a river. The bridge had been washed away 9 years earlier in 2013, and there were no signs or barriers warning drivers that it was no longer there. Police responded to the scene during the early morning hours and found Phil dead in his overturned Jeep, which unfortunately had landed upside down in the water. The North Carolina State Patrol said that there were barricades in place at one point, but that they must have been removed before Paxson's accident. According to authorities, neither local nor state officials were responsible for the privately owned bridge, and the company that built it had since been dissolved. In a lawsuit, the Paxson family blamed Google, arguing that the company's failure to update its map system played a direct role in Phil's death. The lawsuit also blames two other companies, including one which allegedly owned, controlled, or was responsible for the destroyed bridge, which remains unrepaired for now. The case is ongoing though, so the outcome remains to be seen. Number 9. Lost woman pays with her life. Many people don't realize this, but most of New York State is rural and sparsely populated. A lot of places have weak cell phone and GPS service at best, which can make it especially tricky for drivers who are unfamiliar with the area that they're driving through. This was most likely the case for a carload of young adults who pulled into the wrong driveway while searching for their friend's house in the town of Hebron in April 2023. After realizing they were at the wrong address, the friends went to leave, only to be shot at by a man who stepped out onto the front porch with a gun in his hands. Later identified as 65-year-old Kevin Monahan, he allegedly fired 2 bullets, one of which fatally struck 20-year-old Kaylin Gillis. Unable to call 911 due to the lack of a phone signal, the group drove to the neighboring town of Salem and summoned emergency help. But by the time first responders arrived, Kaylin had died from her injuries. Officers paid a visit to Monahan, who reportedly refused to exit his home. But he was eventually coaxed out of the house and into police custody with the help of a 911 dispatcher, who spoke with him over the phone during the hour-long negotiation. Monahan faces a second-degree murder charge in connection with Kaylin's death. Unfortunately, though, we'll have to wait and see what punishment he receives. Number 8. Submerged sedan. In a Facebook post dated to March of 2021, the Charlton, Massachusetts Fire Department shared a series of photos showing the painstaking process of pulling a submerged car out of Bufhamville Lake. Thankfully, the driver had managed to escape the vehicle and was waiting on shore when emergency responders arrived. But by then, the sedan was almost entirely submerged in 10 feet of water. According to Auto Evolution, the driver seemed to be using a GPS system that came with the car, which is less likely to have up-to-date and accurate information than a navigation app like Google Maps or Waze. The key takeaway from the incident is that a driver shouldn't blindly trust their GPS, even though the companies that provide these services do their best to keep them as current as possible. Number 7. Young couple becomes stranded in snow. In a harrowing close call with nature that could have easily ended in death, a young Oregon couple spent 24 hours stranded in deep snow in early 2021 after taking a remote route in Utah that was recommended by Google Maps. According to a Facebook post on the Grand County Sheriff's Search and Rescue page, the pair were driving at an elevation of roughly 8,400 feet along an unplowed road when they realized that the snow was too deep for them to continue onward. They attempted to turn around, but they got stuck, giving them no choice but to call for help and wait. A tow truck got stuck while trying to reach the stranded couple, but it was freed by a second tow truck, which then proceeded to the couple's vehicle while authorities dispatched snowmobiles to retrieve the couple and their dog. Strandings along this particular route, known as Castleton Gateway Road, have become particularly problematic in recent years, according to the Grand County Sheriff's Office. In many cases, people who are unfamiliar with the area are directed along the unmaintained road by their navigation systems. Also, in many cases, the unsuspecting individuals who mistakenly take the recommended route are unprepared to spend a night in winter conditions. Just weeks before the couple and their dog became stranded, another party got stuck along a section of the road with no cell phone service. They were unable to call for help, but were lucky enough to be rescued after being spotted by a helicopter crew from overhead. Number 6. German driver gets stuck in cherry tree. Back in 2007, when GPS systems were arguably much less reliable than they are today, a 37-year-old German delivery driver programmed his navigation system to guide him to a factory in Switzerland where he was to drop off some cargo. Everything went as planned until he actually arrived at his destination, at which point the GPS apparently told him to drive into an area blocked off by warning signs clearly stating no entry. Instead of heeding the signs, though, the driver listened to the navigation system and turned onto a walkway in broad daylight. Then he quickly became entangled in a cherry tree and was unable to reverse out of the embarrassing predicament, forcing local officials to chop down branches in order to free the truck. And when all was said and done, the driver had damaged 2 lampposts, some landscaping, and the tree itself. Given his decision to blatantly ignore the warning signs and rely wholeheartedly on his inaccurate GPS, the driver was fined 650 Swiss francs for the damages. Number 5. An 1,800-mile detour. The trip from 67-year-old Sabine Moreau's home in Soleurre-sur-Sambre, Belgium, to the train station in Brussels should have been just 38 miles from start to finish, but the senior citizen ended up detouring 1,800 miles through 6 countries before ending up 900 miles away from her destination in Zagreb, Croatia. Moreau was planning to pick up a friend at the transit hub when she took a wrong turn, which she'd later blame on her TomTom GPS system. Although she passed through multiple clearly marked border crossings throughout the 2-day drive and stopped to refuel her car several times and napped at least once, she didn't stop to question whether she was on the wrong path or how to get on the right path. The elderly driver later told a Belgian news outlet that she was distracted and kept her foot on the pedal. In fact, she didn't even notice she wasn't in Belgium anymore until she'd driven through France, Germany, Austria, Slovenia, and into Croatia. When a reporter asked Moreau if she found the length of her trip or the fact that the signs in multiple languages to be unusual, she replied, "Maybe, but I was preoccupied." By then, Moreau's worried son had reported her missing and her friend had found another ride to her house. She phoned home to let her family know what had happened right as officers were about to search her home and launch a large-scale manhunt. Luckily, though, nothing terrible happened other than a lot of wasted gas, time, and perhaps money. And in the end, Moreau safely arrived home 60 hours after the ordeal began. Number 4. Luxury sedan plunges into river. A 28-year-old British woman named Hayley was just trying to get to a christening in Leicestershire one morning in early 2007 when she accidentally drove her £96,000 Mercedes SL 500 into the River Sence in Sheepy Magna. She put her faith in her GPS and ignored multiple signs warning drivers that the path she was on wasn't meant for passenger vehicles. But by the time she realized that something was terribly wrong, it was too late to reverse course. According to the Register, the river was swollen after heavy rain in recent floods and quickly overcame the sedan. The rushing waters gushed into the stranded vehicle, sending it 650 feet downstream as it bounced from one riverbank to the other. A witness later described seeing Hayley desperately try to escape her vehicle as she screamed for help. The terrified motorist tried kicking the windows out with her feet, but she didn't have any luck. By some miracle, though, Hayley managed to get her windows to open. She squeezed out of her car and onto the roof with just moments to spare before she would have been completely underwater. And not long after she emerged from the car, it slipped beneath the water's surface. So she was lucky to be alive. The witness helped Hayley get to a service station where she was able to call for help. Her grateful parents later stopped by at the Good Samaritan's house with chocolate and flowers as a thank you gift. And in the meantime, the Mercedes-Benz remained submerged until about a week later when a tow truck was able to pull it from the water. Number 3. Russian driver freezes to death. In December 2020, 18-year-old Sergei Ustinov and Vladislav Istomin became the latest unfortunate individuals to learn that a tiny GPS error can cost someone their life. The incident occurred while the pair were driving along Russia's Kaluma Highway, a 1,262-mile stretch of desolate road infamously known as the Road of Bones. Built during the Stalin era, the highway has been synonymous with death since its construction phase, when an estimated 250,000 or more forced laborers died building it. Ustinov and Istomin just happened to be driving through the coldest inhabited region on Earth when they took a shortcut recommended by Google Maps. It was supposed to be quicker than the standard route, but the navigation app failed to realize that the road it led the friends to had been abandoned back in the 1970s and had gone unmaintained ever since. The men accidentally drove over a wooden spike, damaging the car's radiator and stranding them in the Siberian wilderness with no cell phone signal or any detectable sign of human life. Lacking any other options, Ustinov and Istomin built a small fire, but it wasn't enough to keep them warm in the negative 58-degree Fahrenheit weather, especially since neither of them were wearing proper winter clothing. So by the time Ustinov was found frozen solid in the driver's seat of the car, it was too late to save his life. Istomin was found clinging to life and was rushed to a hospital in critical condition with acute hypothermia. It's unclear, though, whether he recovered or if he ultimately succumbed to his injuries. Number 2. Delivery driver becomes perilously perched on a cliff. Like many misguided drivers who become stranded while following their GPS instructions, 43-year-old Robert Jones failed to stop and question his navigation system, even when it became clear that something wasn't right one day in 2009. The delivery driver was being led up a narrow path in West Yorkshire, England, and while the route certainly didn't seem like a road, the GPS system kept insisting that it was. So Jones continued to follow it, only for his BMW to end up perilously perched on the edge of a 100-foot cliff. A crowd of shocked locals gathered around, while a recovery crew spent a total of 9 hours freeing the car and dragging it away from the cliff with the help of an ATV. And while Jones felt comfortable blaming his GPS, the police concluded that he should have known better than to continue along a route that was clearly not meant for passenger vehicles. As a result, he was charged with careless driving and also had the pleasure of enduring the public humiliation that came along with having the incident grace national news headlines. In the words of a police spokesperson, "Nobody was hurt, but when someone nearly drives off a cliff, that shows a lack of care which needs to be investigated." One spectator told Mail Online about how Jones should have trusted his eyes more than his navigation system when he realized that there was no road in front of him. And another local mentioned how the incident took a lack of common sense to a whole new level. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. Number 1. U-turn into a lake. Driving in an unfamiliar place can be confusing, but it wasn't enough to explain how 3 women from Mexico drove their car into a lake at Mercer Slough Nature Park in Bellevue, Washington, after a Costco convention in 2011. Thankfully, though, the trio survived. According to the Seattle Times, the women, who were all in their 30s, told the police that they were following directions from their GPS at around midnight when they got lost. They were trying to get back to their hotel and were waiting for the navigation system to reroute when they turned down a road that they thought would lead them to the highway. The pathway that they'd mistaken for a road was actually a boat launch, and they ended up calling 911 to let the police know that their rental car was floating and that they were trapped in a jungle. It's unclear whether the GPS was operating in Spanish or English, but the women primarily spoke Spanish and needed a translator in order to communicate with law enforcement. So in all fairness, it's possible that their GPS was running in English and they got confused, which would be understandable, especially since it was pitch dark out at the time. When a tow truck was dispatched to the scene, the car was submerged and was far out into the water. The truck was unable to tow it out, so one can only hope that the women opted for insurance coverage on the rental. Number 8. Katie Belflower. 17-year-old Jenna Nanetti and 20-year-old Mike Simons got married in 2002, just months after meeting. They lived together at Jenna's grandmother's home in San Joaquin County, California, with plans to save up for their own place. However, the marriage fell apart within months and the pair eventually separated. Mike then moved in with Jenna's former classmate, Katie Belflower, who he'd been having an affair with. Jenna vanished later that year. After going out one night, she left her grandmother a voicemail saying that someone had attacked her and she was in danger. She never came home, and her car was found engulfed in flames outside a bar. A fisherman discovered Jenna's body in a remote area with 2 gunshot wounds to the chest. But investigators had little to go on, and the case stalled until the following year, when a local deputy saw Katie Belflower and her friend Jeff Hamilton crouched over a young woman outside in the middle of the night. Katie and Jeff were wearing latex gloves and were huddled around their friend, Aspen Loom's head. The pair claimed they were just worried that Loom was going to vomit on them and that they wanted to keep their hands clean. Aspen initially went along with the story, but later told law enforcement that Katie and Jeff were trying to suffocate her to death when the deputy pulled up. She also said that after their run-in with the deputy, Katie profusely apologized for trying to kill her and begged her not to report it, which was actually the first thing she did as soon as she got away from her attackers. During questioning, Jeff admitted that Katie had asked for his help killing Aspen, whom she'd come to see as a growing threat to her relationship with Mike. Jeff also implicated himself, Katie, and Mike in Jenna's death, telling deputies that Mike lured her over to his house to talk. Katie struck her with a 2x4 from behind, and Mike pretended to be angry at her for it. He comforted Jenna, then drove her to a remote area where Katie and Jeff were waiting to finish the job. The 3 suspects were charged with murder. Katie took a plea deal and was sentenced to 25 years to life. Jeff pleaded guilty in exchange for a 15-year sentence, and Mike was sentenced to life plus 25 years. Katie gave birth to his baby in prison a few months later, and thankfully the child was adopted by a family who could raise the child normally. Number 7. Sarah Parker. Deputies in Calcasieu Parish, Louisiana, received an unusual tip in 2018 from a caller who claimed that a woman was driving around with a dead body in her trunk. The suspect in question was 22-year-old Sarah Parker, who was dating a married Army soldier named Logan Kyle. They were both in the car when law enforcement pulled them over, along with Parker's 2 young children in the back seats. Inside the trunk was the body of Kyle's pregnant wife, Shalana. Their marriage had been rocky for quite some time, and they'd even separated at one point, which was when Kyle met Parker. But they'd recently decided to try making their marriage work, and as far as Shalana knew, Kyle had ended his relationship with Parker. Authorities believed that Kyle killed Shalana and that he and Parker were looking for somewhere to dispose of the victim's body. Sources close to the case told the Daily Mail that Kyle was unhappy with Shalana because he liked to cross-dress and she disapproved of it. She even reportedly threatened to tell her husband's commanders about her husband's secret, which allegedly ran deeper than being just a hobby. According to one source, Kyle was considering getting gender reassignment surgery once he left the military. Shalana refused to accept this part of her husband's life, but Parker apparently accepted him for who he was. Kyle was convicted of murder and received a life sentence. Parker was charged with obstruction of justice, failing to report a homicide, and 2 counts of contributing to the delinquency of a minor. The outcome of her case is unclear, but if she was convicted of all the charges brought against her, she likely faced up to 40 years of hard labor in the Louisiana state prison system. Number 6. Anne Lundquist. They say that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, and Cynthia Shackelford certainly lived up to the statement after a private investigator confirmed in 2005 that her husband Alan was cheating on her. After giving up her teaching career to be a stay-at-home mom decades earlier, Cynthia depended on her husband to be a good family man, but after they separated, he failed to pay court-ordered alimony. Left to start over on her own, Cynthia sold the family's 5-bedroom house and moved into an apartment before landing herself a retail job. But it wasn't just about money. Cynthia was devastated over the destruction of her 33-year marriage, and she truly felt like someone had unfairly taken something from her. She blamed both Alan and his mistress for the affair, but wanted to set an example that would deter women from pursuing married men. Cynthia filed a lawsuit against Alan's mistress, Anne Lundquist, for alienation of affection, which allows spouses to sue third parties for interfering with their marriages. North Carolina is just one of 7 states that recognize alienation of affection claims, and it sees about 200 cases per year, according to ABC News. Most states have gotten rid of the law, which is widely considered to be outdated, and North Carolina lawmakers have thought about abolishing it altogether. But it remains on the books thanks to conservative legislators who feel like voting down the statute would condone adultery. The court ruled in Cynthia's favor in the end, and she was rewarded with a whopping $9 million, money that Lundquist claimed she didn't have. In a press interview shortly after the ruling, she said that she planned to appeal the case. It's unclear where the matter currently stands, but Cynthia definitely got her point across, and hopefully she moved on to better things after the case was settled. Number 5. Simmon Deutch. In 2016, a British woman named Simmon Deutch met a married hedge fund boss on a website that caters specifically to people looking for an affair. The man made it abundantly clear that he had no plans to leave his wife, and Deutch said she was okay with that. The two met up a handful of times for casual encounters at his home and office, and took trips to Paris and Switzerland together. But Deutch wanted a bigger commitment than her secret lover was willing to give, despite him telling her that it could never be serious. After realizing that she expected him to leave his wife, the businessman ended the affair and cut all ties with Deutch. The scorned mistress subsequently launched a public smear campaign against the man and threatened to expose the affair. She also claimed that she'd been pregnant with his baby, but that she miscarried after he dumped her. Instead of caving to Deutsch's demands, the victim came clean to his wife, revealing the truth on his own terms and taking away his former girlfriend's power to ruin the marriage by ratting him out. For 2 years, Deutch stalked and harassed the family on social media and over the phone. She mocked the couple's marriage, called the wife ugly and trashy, and cut her down in almost every way imaginable. The man's wife was severely traumatized to the point where she stopped socializing. She also grew to be terrified of going on the internet and worried constantly about how the situation was affecting her children. Deutsch's behavior eventually caught up with her, though, and in 2018 she was charged with 2 counts of stalking. Her lawyer, Peter Caldwell, argued in court that Deutch got carried away in her fantasies about where the relationship could go after being swept off her feet by her lover. Insisting that the relationship was more than a fling, Caldwell described the victim as cruel for the way he shot down Deutsch's girlish notions of romance. The judge was unmoved by the lawyer's narrative and described Deutch as calculating and remorseless. He acknowledged that she mistook the relationship for being more serious than it was, but that her actions were so extreme that he couldn't consider it as a mitigating factor. As a result, Deutch received a suspended prison sentence and was required to attend rehab. Number 4. Alexis Williams. Alexis Williams was extremely upset when her married girlfriend, Donyavia Lagway, broke up with her in 2021 and went back to her husband. Just weeks later, Lagway, her husband Gregory Kaye, and the couple's daughter were found shot to death inside their Houston, Texas home. Another victim was severely injured but survived by playing dead, while another was unharmed. Lagway was also pregnant at the time of the shooting. Phone records yielded evidence that Williams had recruited her childhood friend, 28-year-old Xavier Davis, to massacre the family. She allegedly promised Davis a large sum of money for the favor and claimed that the cash was stashed inside the victim's apartment. Williams watched on FaceTime while Davis carried out the gruesome triple homicide. Some of the details about what went on are so horrifying that they're better left unmentioned, and the fact that Williams wanted to see the crimes happen makes the case even more disturbing. Then, after masterminding the brutal murders, Williams had the nerve to show up at the family's funeral. Evidence further revealed that Davis allegedly carjacked a vehicle before heading over to the family's apartment. Both he and Williams were charged with 2 counts of capital murder, 1 count of capital murder of a victim younger than 10, and 1 count of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. They were taken to jail and are being held without bond as their cases proceed through the court system. Prosecutors plan to seek the death penalty against Davis, but haven't announced their decision on whether they'll pursue capital punishment in Williams' case. Her next court date is set for February 2023, so we'll have to wait and see how everything plays out in the coming months. Number 3. Daa Chova. After moving to Jefferson City, Missouri on a student visa during the early 2000s, Ukrainian national Daa Chova began an affair with a married lawyer named James Douglas Barding. To avoid having to leave the country when her visa expired, she married a man named Tim Dunville in 2005, but she apparently never lived with him. In fact, Daa lived just around the block from Barding, and the affair dragged on for years. Dunville agreed to the scam with the understanding that he could divorce Daa after she had been in the United States long enough to legally stay without being married. In the meantime, Daa had 2 children with Barding, but put Dunville down as the father on their birth certificates. During an immigration hearing in 2010, she claimed that Dunville was the father of her children and that the 2 of them shared a home together. However, authorities became suspicious and ordered a DNA test on the kids, which proved that Barding was their real father and that Daa had been lying for years about it. Barding and Daa both pleaded guilty to conspiring to defraud the United States by enticing a U.S. citizen to marry a foreign national. Daa was sentenced to 3 years of probation and was fined $1,000. She ended up moving to Arizona, and it appears as though the couple are no longer together. Barding received a 1-month prison sentence followed by a year of supervised release. He was also hit with a $3,000 fine and obtained full custody of the children. Number 2. Amanda Lee Love. 44-year-old Velvet Burns was found stabbed to death in her Jacksonville, Florida home in 2019. Her husband Jerry was working out of town at the time, but police soon discovered that he had a mistress named Amanda Lee Love and that she was in the area when Velvet was murdered. During the investigation, they found evidence that Jerry offered Amanda $5,000 to arrange for someone to kill his wife and to drive them to the scene. He told her to make it look like a burglary and promised to give her an additional payout after cashing in on Velvet's life insurance policy. Detectives believed that others were involved and that Jerry and Amanda may not have been responsible for stabbing Velvet to death, but they charged the pair with murder since they were allegedly the ones who orchestrated the crime. A few weeks later, investigators arrested the hitman, 37-year-old Stephen Shelton Hand, after a witness claimed they saw him committing the crime and frantically destroying evidence afterward. In the end, Hand pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life behind bars, but Amanda and Jerry's cases appear to be ongoing. Number 1. Kaye Reed. British charity worker Kaye Reed was crushed when she lost a job she really enjoyed in 2016, and she suspected her boss Robert Page of having something to do with it. The two had been involved in a steamy affair, which allegedly continued after Page got married. After being fired, Reed posted a nude photo of her former boss on his wife's Facebook page and was arrested for it. Reed's lawyer described how Page became a shoulder for the young woman to cry on when she split from a previous boyfriend. The two reportedly continued to talk and fooled around on at least one occasion after Page and his wife exchanged their vows. The defense argued that Reed felt taken advantage of and humiliated, and that she posted the photo because she was trying to be heard. In her own words, she said she wanted to prove the affair to Page's wife. She pleaded guilty to the revenge porn offense, which could have landed her in prison for 2 years and required her to pay restitution. However, the judge handed down a 6-month conditional discharge and made no orders to compensate the victim, citing Page's provocative behavior as a mitigating factor. Would you rather become lost in Death Valley, commonly known as the hottest place on Earth, in the middle of summer due to a faulty GPS, or escape unscathed after ignoring weather reports and having your car swept away in a flash flood? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.